I started in healthcare a really long time ago. It sadly coincided with the global financial crisis, and I never forget we were on the sort of stream of building hospitals, and I think we had 500 million of debt with Lehman and 500 million debt with Royal Bank of Scotland.
Must have been a lot of fun.
And well, no, but you can imagine where those lines of debt went very quickly. So best product, best people, and thirdly, the best systems and operations. If you can put those three together for that best product, then you'll have a great business. There's a graveyard littered with people who basically bought lots of practices and smashed them together, irrespective of the quality, and thought they would get a higher multiple. And those days are sadly over. Doctors really hate the style and this top down. We're also going to paint you blue, and these are uniforms. Immediately, dentists bow against it. I always remember one of our early stage dentists, and she won't mind me saying this, said, look, I like to buy my practice nurses some pretty nice handbags at Christmas. Can I still continue doing it? I say, yes, you can, because what we do is we give them autonomy, but we also ask them to guarantee their EBITDA. So we ask them to guarantee on the way in for 5 years. I'm very proud, actually. Our staff turnover is below 4%. The industry average is 20%, and post-transaction, it's normally 25%. I always believe, healthcare is like having a kettle on the stove. At some point, it's going to explode. You just don't know when. However, the people that ask the toughest questions and maybe a bit niggly with it, they're showing they're engaged and they're thinking about it. And actually, some of the people who've asked the toughest questions have been some of my most successful partners.
Great. So we're back for the business of a clinic. We're here with Mark, who's going to share a bit more about his journey in private healthcare leadership and what came before that. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your journey at a high level from start to what you're doing now?
Okay, sure. Hello, Mark Aichroth. I'm currently a co-founder and chief executive of DeNovo Dental Partners. I started in healthcare a really long time ago, because I'm pretty old now. But prior to that, I spent 10 years as an army officer in the British Army, and did lots of exciting and interesting things, and really sort of fell into healthcare in some ways. My father was a surgeon. My wife is a nurse, and so I'd always had sort of medical around me at that time. And I was lucky enough that company called Humana, which eventually went in, or its hospital side went into HCA, ran a training program for people that had come out of the army. And that was in the States, and then sort of finished off quite a lot of it in Europe. So I went on to that training program, and that was in hospital administration. And it was phenomenal. It was a 1-year program. And they, taught you everything from each different specialty, following patients through to engineering in the hospital, etc. You really got ground up, and I really found that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed hospital administration, and I was very lucky in that my first job was as a senior director was with what is now HCA, the hospital they had in Geneva in Switzerland. And I suddenly found that I had a real interest for development, and I got to know quite well Rick Scott, who was the chief executive of Columbia HCA, which it was then. And he's since gone on to become governor of Florida, and very eminent man. But I got really into development at that stage. HCA went through a few problems, and I still got recruited and went into health insurance, and spent time with Humana Health Insurance and Blue Cross Blue Shield in Chicago. But all the time I was very interested in doctor ownership. I felt that if doctors owned part of something, that they could completely, it was different how they interacted with it, particularly when 85% of the cost in healthcare is influenced by the doctor. So if you don't have them engaged and on site, it's always very, very difficult. And came back from the States in the early 2000s, and had the good fortune to meet Ali Parser at the time, and, sort of shared our view very much on on doctor ownership and was one of the first 3-4 people to join Circle in a very small office in the city. And we took it very much from an idea to then buying some hospitals and then building our own brand of hospitals. All the time, the shared ownership. Circle, we took it actually to the next level. At that time, 50% of the equity was owned by everyone who worked in the company. So it was a really, really exciting time. It sadly coincided with the global financial crisis. And I never forget, we were on the stream of building hospitals, and I think we had 500 million of debt with Lehman and 500 million debt with Royal Bank of Scotland.
Must have been a lot of fun.
And well, no, but you can imagine where those lines of debt went very quickly. And you know, we very much had stale life, but we managed to keep on course and weathered through it. Company went public in 2012, and Ali left in end of 2012, 2013. I sort of left fairly soon after that. And you know, I suppose the next thing is I did a couple of other entrepreneurial things, but I got asked and got involved in dentistry just really straight after COVID, really. I had a contact, Australian, with some Australian investors, and they had this sort of shared ownership model, this partnership model that I thought was really, really interesting, which had been tried before in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And they asked if I would go out and help set up and help roll it out, which I was very pleased to do so. It was an interesting time. It would play to something I liked. I enjoy working and interacting with the dentists, very much like the doctors or the surgeons that we were doing before. And I spent just over a year in the States buying practices and moving it forward. I felt a little bit at the time it was not entirely what I wanted to do. I felt a little bit of an employee, and I still had this sort of entrepreneurial itch that needed to be scratched. And also the investors were very keen that I moved to the United States at the time. And my wife just said 20 years ago, yeah, great, but not now. Which I was a little disappointed at the time, but I could understand her point of view. So actually on the way back on the plane, I started writing the business plan and the mission and vision values for what we've created here in the UK with DeNovo Dental Partners. And I flew back and I spoke to a couple of my colleagues that I'd worked with United Dental Corps in America, and said, look, I'm thinking the UK is really interested. It's unconsolidated. It doesn't have anything like the amount of DSAs that there are in the States. I think it's really interesting. We should have a look at this. The interesting thing was I didn't know any dentists, and I was very lucky that Kristen Pope and Derek Schnacks has joined me as part of the sort of founding team of DeNovo. And and we took the idea, the shared ownership model, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment, but we took the shared ownership model and we managed to find some dentists that were really interested. I also talked to a dentist who was working with me on something else, and I took the idea to him, and I found out that he'd run a dental consulting business, and I sort of took the idea to him, and he said, wow, yeah, this is really interesting. So we started developing it and rolling it out with dentists in the UK. And there were some very gracious dentists who said, we love this model. We're really interested. We'll go with it. So we said, great. And we signed these letters of intent. But then it took a little bit of time for us to get funding, about 1.5 years, in fact, because it was, interest rates had gone up, etc. And we had a lot of rejections from private equity, a lot. And then we came across one, and they were very gracious, and here we are today.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, sure.
I think maybe
Sorry, was
that was one comment. I think there's first of all, it's a very interesting journey, because it seemed like there were multiple points in your own career where the next step was perhaps not the obvious one, and yet it is the one that you took. So,
yes.
For example, as you suggested, coming out of service, moving into healthcare, there was a 1-year program that seemed to be the right foray into the next space. But I imagine that it could have just as easily been something completely different. And for whatever reason, that was the pull. You had some personal connection to healthcare.
Yes.
And then similarly in dental, not a space that you necessarily had great connection to or knew very well. And yet you found yourself again where the opportunity collides with this, the idea. So I'd love to understand, I guess, going back to the beginning of the journey, you did this 1-year program, which you said was really wonderful, took you all the way down into the weeds of the healthcare environment. This is in the US, this is in the US, which is a different animal in some ways into itself. I'm curious, what married or what carried across the experience from being in military service to becoming a healthcare leader? What were the sort of principles of service and leadership that you found were completely natural as a bridging function to the work you then did in healthcare? And what did you have to sort of learn from scratch as completely unfamiliar territory?
I think that's a really good question. I think first of all, if you're a young army officer, you learn from an early age you've got to be able to talk and you've got to be able to relate and you've got to be able to work. And in many ways, you've got to be able to sell internally a lot of what you've got to do. You've also got to be incredibly collegiate. Everyone thinks the army or British Army is very authoritarian. It's not. It's very collegiate. You will have people who have a lot more experience, who are sergeants or corporals, who will let you know the way they think, but they expect you to still lead. They expect you to still carry out that plan. So in many ways, that's very similar. I think, and they want to see, they wanted, when I remember on training program, they wanted to see great drive and enthusiasm and, bias for action and working. They want to see a good level of written. The big gap I had was I hadn't had any financial training of any type. And I remember they sent me on the first year of coursework of ACCA, Chartered Accounting thing. And I realized I didn't want to be an accountant.
This is 1 year of scripture.
Well, it was compressed, and but actually it gave me I'm really pleased I did it, because certainly working for an American company like FCA and their growth that they were going through at the time, I didn't even know what EBITDA was then, and then I quickly learned out and multiples and just M&A and all the rest of it. And I had some wonderful people that took me under their wing and really showed me how to do transactions, right the way through from opening term sheets all the way through to completion and sale and purchase agreements, etc. So I was incredibly lucky to have had that, and I think my time in the military combined with some of my sort of education that I got just allowed me to find that I really enjoy doing this. And I think I always enjoy the developing of the relationships, whether that was in Spain, Switzerland, the Middle East, South Africa. We did a lot of work. It was a really, really exciting time.
It's interesting to hear you describe the journey of becoming, my words, not yours, financially literate in a way that perhaps you hadn't been.
Mind you, I might point out, probably my managing director and chief financial officer might doubt my literacy.
We don't invite them to this conversation. That's fine. But I think it's interesting because I imagine in some ways that may actually give you and or the DNA in DeNovo a sort of empathy for some of the practices that you go on to work with. Because I know from the work that we do, many of the clinic leaders that we engage with are extraordinarily competent and thoughtful in and around all things patient care, patient experience, patient journey. And when it comes time to wrestling down the financial backbone of provider operations, perhaps that's a less familiar space. So do you think at all that experience of having to learn and play catch up has sort of given you a slightly different, maybe more rounded view as a leader in the space? And I know that oftentimes consolidation comes with a very clear private equity hat, and oftentimes people may not have the same form of empathy that you might have moving into that space. Has that been something that you've seen at all in the work?
I think that there's sort of three things that I sort of learned very quickly. You've got to have the clinicians on your side. If you're running a private hospital, they are your lifeblood. If you don't, work with the clinicians, recruit the right surgeons. I always was sort of told, pick your studs, pick the right ones. Don't pick, the top one. Because you've picked the top one, the rest won't join you, and really be careful in who you work with going forwards. And, you will always have issues, when discussing, you will have problems. And I always remember, I was told, first of all, in many ways, a clinician will look at you, a surgeon or a dentist, and they will think, look, I've been trained to do what I do. I've been trained extremely, 7 years of my life, I've been trained to do what I do. I can probably do most of what you do, and I could probably learn it. So you've got about 30 seconds or minutes, if you're lucky, in which to really make me believe that you're going to make my day easier. And then if you combine that, secondly, with, you've got to remember that the surgeon or doctor or dentist is always going to look at everything from the patient's point of view. So if you can prove to them that their patients are going to be safest in the environment that you're going to create or the systems that you're going to create around them, you're starting to make progress. And if there's a difficult decision, they will always look at it from the patient point of view. So you've really got to get that in your head. And it's one of the things. And then, the other thing is if you're trying to create a great company, and these aren't my own, I borrowed them from other people, but, if you could, first of all, have the best product, whether that be a hospital, dental company, insurance product, whatever it is, and you can have the best product, that is really important. Then if you can hire the best people to sell that best product or to make it work. So best product, best people, and thirdly, the best systems and operations. You can put those three together for that best product, then you'll have a great business. It's relatively straightforward. It's relatively simple. But I've always done that. And you've got to try and convey those aspects to clinicians going forward. So that's what you're going to do.
I have a colleague who says simple but not easy.
Yeah.
Which is very much the case here.
But also, you mustn't forget that a lot of people are always looking for the simple answer in healthcare, and there isn't necessarily. Very often you have complicated problems that have complicated solutions. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a simple solution to everything.
So we're now into the DeNovo chapter.
Mm-hmm.
The backstory for how makes sense. You saw an opportunity. You became curious about the UK. Obviously, you are British by background, so you probably had a first degree understanding for consumer behavior, market behavior. Obviously, there's an NHS backdrop in this as well. Where are we now with DeNovo? So you're up and running. It's capitalized. You're growing. You have a leadership team. What is the reach? How many practices and or patients are served and or metrics of your choosing? Where is the business now?
Well, very grateful to our investors because essentially we didn't have anything to sell them. We came with an idea. We said, here are some letters of intent for some practices we'd like to buy. Can you fund us? And they said that's unusual. And so they very much sort of said, well, we'll work with you to build the company around you. This is really exciting. And so that was the start. So actually when we started, which is only in March the 1st, 25, so just 50 months ago, we had at that point 6 practices, 4 transactions, which we bought the same day that we also funded the business. So everything happened on the same day. And I'm very grateful because we really had some amazing people at that point. Someone, Karen Best, who's had, nearly 40 years in dentistry, done every job right for up to COO of some of the largest companies. Brad Southwood, who had done a number of exits within private equity, came on at the time as CFO, and now has moved into the managing director position. And he had done a number of exits, really understood the private equity world. And then Udi Wickramer, who's now moved into the CFO, who had a strong M&A background and understanding. But we had no offices. Kristen, who's my co-founder, was based in the United States, and she was running the transaction process and a lot of the programs. we had no bank account. We had nothing. And all of a
four
sudden,
practices.
six practice buildings. And, it was, as I said, it was, it's like building airplanes, we were flying it, but we had to do it. And then we also had a huge drive from our funders, right? You say, to get to break even. And we could only do that by acquiring some more practices. And literally the day we got funded, our whole pipeline, for one reason or another, started to fall apart. So we had to focus on getting the 6 practices together. And this is where Brian, MD, Brian Southwood, was just remarkable. He said, right, let's take it back to basics again. Let's redo the cred stack. Let's redo the marketing. Let's think about how we're going to do it. And it was the right call. And we then started buying more practices. And, at the end of last year, we managed to get to, approximately to a sort of EBITDA break even.
Fantastic. Huge accomplishment.
And we now have 16 practices. I think we've got about 24 million in revenue and about 300 something employees. And by the end of the month, we'll have another 5 practices, with some sizable acquisitions going on. But look, this is easy by comparison. It's vanity buying practices. Everyone says in dentistry, well, I'm in practices too. But there's a graveyard littered with people who basically bought lots of practices and smashed them together, irrespective of the quality, and thought they would get a higher multiple. And those days are sadly over. And what is really important now is, okay, buy the practices, get the EBITDA, but then show you that you can grow it and show that you've got something different. You've got a better culture and all the rest of it. So there's actually the hard part. And I'm, incredibly grateful for the operations team under Karen, integration with Kristen, the way that we've managed to pull these practices together and get us to where we are at the moment.
It's interesting. I'm reflecting back on some of the other folks who have joined us. We had a gentleman from Shore Capital out in the U.S. who do a lot of healthcare consolidation. Another gentleman who leads M&A in the MSK space. And it's very interesting to hear you say that because it echoes what we've heard, which is that the good old days of buy and smash and sell are sort of a thing of the past. But also when you start to look at that value creation story, the question then becomes sort of where do you go first? Because you can start sort of hacking off the bottom or adding to the top, and it's usually a bit of both. So I'm sort of curious, when you think about the value transformation story at a site level, what does that look like for you? What is the sort of the DeNovo story of we take a practice from A to B? What is A and what is B on that journey?
Okay, so I think this is really getting to the meat of what we want to talk about, and we have a very unique, different model. It's not our own model. It's one that had been tried very successfully in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. We've adapted it for the UK market, but essentially what we do is we buy at a fixed multiple of EBITDA on a cash-free, debt-free basis. We buy the practice, and we pay a multiple of EBITDA, and we pay 70% in cash and 30% in parent company stock. This is a parent company stock. This is an institutional strip stock. It hasn't had any monkey business. It's not got loads of vesting and heaven knows what. It's as if, as I say, it's the same. It's the same stock as if which I did, invested all of my colleagues in the business. Okay, so we do that, and our multiple is quite a bit lower than everyone else's, I might point out at the front. So that's always quite interesting. Secondly, we say, look, you now become a partner at that point, and collectively after the investors, the dentists own the most stock in the company. And you are now a part owner of the business, and part of being a part owner in the business takes a responsibility. It's exciting, and it's only through shares that you have a real say and a real input into the business. So they're listening at this point. Now, as I said, we pay a little bit less on the going in. So we pay on the going in, we pay on the way through, and hopefully with some liquidity event, we pay on at the end. On the way through, So if what we essentially do is we set what their last 12 months EBITDA is. So let's say it's 200,000 for a practice. If they manage to grow that EBITDA, we then pay them a multiple of that EBITDA at the end of the year, but just the growth amount. And again, we pay 70% in cash, 30% in stock. And we do that at the end of year 1, year 2, and year 3. So they can actually make quite a sizable amount. And essentially what you're doing is you're paying a certain amount for what your EBITDA will be in 3 years' time.
And is the growth, so I'm running a dental practice, hypothetically. I'm a 6 surgery, 2.5 million turnover, 350K EBITDA, whatever it might be. I'm approached by DeNovo. I think it's really interesting. I like the idea of shared ownership. I get comfortable with a lower ticket on the way in. Now I'm going to try and do some of this growth over the next 12, 24, and 36 months. Is that growth entirely on my shoulders? Am I pulling on the shared services and expertise of DeNovo? What does that sort of growth model look like?
I'm now going to, if I could, I'll just take you a bit further into this.
Yeah, please.
So one of the reasons why they really like DeNovo and what I've been trying to achieve my whole life, I've been in healthcare, is that, doctors really hate the style-ness top-down. We've decided that you're going to use these types of implants because we've decided we got the best price and we've decided the product quality is good. We're also going to paint you blue, or these are uniforms. Immediately, dentists bow against it. And, the traditional model of a lot of our competitors, and it worked at the time, but we're different. That's all I'm saying, has been to buy them, pay 70% up front, and then pay the other 3 years based on growth and hitting various targets. But what happens then is they immediately lose control in your case. And what we've said is, with our model, we're going to pay you at the beginning, but you're going to keep control. And we don't just mean clinical control, we mean complete autonomy. You're able to continue running your practice going forwards. And that's really exciting, and they get really excited. I always remember one of our early stage dentists, and she won't mind me saying this, said, look, I like to buy my practice nurses some pretty nice handbags at Christmas. Can I still continue doing it? I say, yes, you can, because what we do is we give them autonomy, but we also ask them to guarantee their EBITDA. So we ask them to guarantee on the way in for 5 years. If they take another one of the additional things, then it's another year added on for each additional year they take. So it could go out to 8 years. So they get the autonomy, but in return, they have to guarantee the EBITDA.
Nice.
So it's kind of an interesting thing. And then, during this whole process, they'll have amassed quite a lot of shares. Hopefully we go through our process. They feel comfortable that they're the same shares that we all have, and we're all motivated together, and that they understand that our investor is going to, want to get out at a certain point and allow someone else to run with it. Interesting. It's very exciting from that point of view. So there's this, on the way in, then the way through with the growth, and then the shares at the end. There's the autonomy, but also the path to growth. Now, initially, many of the dentists will initially say, okay, you said autonomy, leave me alone. I don't even want to see you for 6 months. Okay. I'll check in on the monthly basis and we'll do team calls, but I don't want you turning up and looking at the practice, because I've gone with you because you've offered autonomy. I understand what I've committed to. I've got to meet that last 12 months EBITDA. I understand that. I will do that, but just leave me alone. He said, that's okay, we'll do that. We obviously make sure that there's an element of IT connectivity, protection, obviously compliance systems and banking. We have to make sure those all, because ultimately I'm the nominated individual and responsible from a compliance point of view. So we have to make sure that all of that comes together. It's really important. And then you sort of said, but actually after a while, then they suddenly say, well, look, I could actually do quite well on growth. So then it's when Karen and Becky and their team, they start coming in and they say, well, look, here are some of the things that we can help you with. We can help you with your supply costs. We have great relationships with Dental Directory, Henry Schein. We have fantastic relationships with the with Denplan, Patient Plan Direct, that provide the sort of payment plans for dentists. We have a lot of different opportunities that we're able to roll out. So part of what we've been doing, this is where the team has been so good, is been creating these playbooks, creating an onboarding processes. Remember, I talked about systems. You've got to try and document all of this so it all works and do it time and time again, which is really important. In some ways, in some cases, some of the dentists, they want the autonomy, but they want us to do everything. And we have to say, no, you're still going to be running your practice and you're going to be doing that for a number of years. So you've got to get comfortable. We support them. And actually, we find that having our team there reinvigorates them. They really get very passionate about what they're doing. And then at the same time, we have a lot of central functions that we're trying to do. So we're trying to get this collegiate feeling. And, some of them are really interested in clinical governance. Some are interested in, finding out the latest system or whatever. And so we have groups led by the dentists, the executive will support them, that actually try these things out and test them and roll them out. So we get this dentist to dentist sharing of the knowledge and information.
It's interesting. I used to run a multi-site medical aesthetics group, and one of the things that, and I've spoken very openly about this, one of the things that was missing for me in that journey was exactly the thing you just described, which was sort of practice leader to practice leader, rooted in shared winning. Yeah, that's the right way to frame it. So the idea that you've made this mistake down the block, I don't have to make that same mistake. I'll learn what you've done. And hey, by the way, I've figured out this thing, and this might be really beneficial to you. I found it very hard to create, despite best efforts, that sort of relationship with out of group practice leaders, perhaps not a surprise. So I can totally understand why you're uniting practice leaders who otherwise may not be in contact, and you're giving them that forum to say, hold on, we have a shared brain of how to do things well on an opt-in basis, because that's what sounds like the DNA of the group is.
Yeah, it's completely opt-in. They don't have to do it because they got autonomy, but they say, why wouldn't I? Yeah.
It'd probably much nicer to have that pull than to have it sort of be pushed, which I think is exactly.
You've got to constantly work in it, and it doesn't happen overnight. Jared, it doesn't happen overnight. It sounds, you've got to understand when you buy them initially, suddenly there's this change. The banking is different, compliance is different, the IT is different. There's quite a lot that they've got to deal with initially. So you've got to, and some people it takes longer, some people it's quicker. You've got to keep that communication there and make them feel really part of it and make them see the prize. That's the exciting. But I think the beauty of what we're trying to achieve is that, we're now starting to enhance or extend shareholding to within the practices. So one of our practices up in the north of England, she's already shared a lot of her shares with all of her staff in the practice.
Beautiful.
So, I always joke and say, we want to create a John Lewis or Aichroth of dentistry, although that's just a profit share, I might point out. But, we want to really create this feeling of ownership. And I always have people speaking and talking to us about that shared ownership, the responsibility of being a shareholder in a company. And then we're also looking at associates. So we're, what's going to happen when that dentist might want to retire, fired, or right. So we're always looking at associates that we can in some way incentivize and can take on some of that commitment agreement for the EBITDA, but also then take the business forward in the next year. And we've had some really successful examples on that. And I think that will make us more interesting as a company, because we could almost show, if we've got guaranteed profits in perpetuity going forward.
And it's much more durable as well. You don't have this, when everyone's always concerned about the hyper exposure to a single principle or two principles, three principles. What you're saying is, actually, we found a way to compress some of that practitioner exposure on a revenue contribution basis in a single clinic side. I'm actually, we work with a few dental practices, and I'm imagining that if they end up seeing this, they will suddenly start wondering if there's a different path forward. I think one of the things that we see in dentistry where we do work, but also in other healthcare sort of specialties, is that the teams in clinic that really believe in shared value creation, you feel it in the clinic. You feel that sense of shared purpose, of winning means we all win. We have a clinic that we work with that was just acquired by a medical aesthetics group, US based, and they have a small and growing presence in the UK. And much as you're describing, the clinic co-directors decided that they would create a stock option plan for employees of the clinic, people that had been there for a certain amount of time. And it was a wonderful outcome for the whole clinic. And I think that, particularly on the front line, you have massive recruiting obligation, churn issues, staffing issue. Half of the cost in human capital in clinic is just going to be around that retention and incentive alignment. So the fact that there may be a model for practice owners to actually do that, I can see how that alone would be self-fulfilling in terms of its ultimate contribution to profitability and durability in the group, which is very interesting.
I'm very pleased. I'm very proud, actually. I know we've only been just over a year, but our staff turnover is around 4%. Okay.
And there you have it.
And, the industry average is 20, and post-transaction, it's normally 25%. So it says something is slightly different. But I think also I feel our sort of our culture, I remember I was saying I wrote it on the plane on the way. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but there are some really, really big things within that. We try to be very inclusive. We believe, the brain power of the many is better than the few. May take us longer to make decisions, and it does. But when we take that decision, we're very ruthless in execution. But we've got a lot of thought and everything that goes with that. We also we like to be a little bit quirky or a little bit different. And we also made a conscious decision that no one was going to put themselves forward more than anyone else. We're not going to, paint everything pink and have, lots of excitement over everything. We're just going to studiously get on with it and make it happen. The aspect of ownership has been really, really important. And we felt that if we could create that feeling of ownership across the whole thing, make everyone who's a partner feel a partner and that they had influence. So we have to have partners events, which we do, and we've got a big partner event in November and some fantastic people to work with. I think one of the most exciting things, and you'll hear a lot of people talking about this, but I think is an opportunity very much for us, and I think it'll be a couple of years, but one of the practices we bought in the Southwest, Ian Mills, he was dean of the School of Dentistry in the Southwest, and very, very passionate about excellence and quality. And when I was at HCA really had moved forward in outcomes and understanding. And as an executive in a hospital, I could say, someone who'd done an ACL reconstruction, I could find out what their failure rate, that's how many they're done, products they use, their infection rate, their rehab rate, everything. And likewise in prostate surgery, which is terribly important. Although there have been some outcomes that I have to be careful here within the NHS thing, I don't feel that there's that real excellence agenda to the same level. And there's some real opportunities. And I think if we can create a company that can differentiate on excellence, that would be really exciting. And that's something that we will be investing in and we will be starting to capture. Everyone gets very passionate about it. It's actually doing it and seeing it through and making it happen that becomes terribly important as we go forward.
It's funny, before being in clinic operations, I was part of building medical devices. And the things you were saying in my head, you say, what materials were used and what was the failure rate. To me, this is a bill of materials for building a medical device. You have to operate to that standard.
Yes.
And it was so surprising to me that then taking that medical hardware into a clinic environment and coming to realize that there was a slightly less rigorous view clinical excellence by comparison to the devices that were being used in clinic. Now, on the one hand, you say, great, much like driving a car, you need the car to be reliable, but everyone drives a bit differently, so there will be some trade-off. But I think the USP, or one of the USPs of the group in what you're describing, sounds like it is not only the shared ownership component. I think there are a lot of brands, particularly as private healthcare starts to embrace a little bit more of a consumer positioning in some parts of the market. What you're saying actually is we are going to be the place where the quality bar will be nothing shorter than here. This is going to be the place of clinical excellence, potentially even standard setting in clinical excellence. Is that part of the brand ambition for DeNovo?
We've been very, very picky about practices that we've gone for.
It's a diplomatic way.
And we continue to be. We've said no to a lot, and we will continue to do so. Look, I don't want to. I'm setting myself up for a fall. I always believe, healthcare is it's like having a kettle on the stove. At some point, it's going to explode. You just don't know when. And it will always catch you up. But if you have the policies and the procedures and the focus on excellence, and you will live to fight another day, and things will be good. But that is going to happen, and I'm not stupid enough not to realize that. But I think your point is right. If we can differentiate, we've got a unique offering. We've got quality practices. We've got scale. We've got an opportunity where profits are locked in, and and also some succession within that. Why have so many dental companies failed to go public in the US? It's because of succession. They have not been able to continue having dentists working within them, particularly post-COVID. And so I think if we can crack that, I think we'll be in a much better. But we've got to do a lot. It's not going to be entirely easy to do that.
What is the journey here forward? So now you said you're doing your 16 sites. I'm assuming 4 or 5 surgeries per site on average, 6 surgeries per site?
No, generally, it varies. Minimum of 3 surgeries.
Minimum of 3. Okay, so
some quite a lot more.
60 surgeries.
Yeah.
I'm making it up across the group thereabouts. You mentioned 24 million in top line, profitable in and to itself, a huge accomplishment. If we sit down in a year and we say, how was the last year made? What is the journey forward for DeNovo in the next 12-month basis? Is it more of the same? Is it a slight change in appetite for practice profile? What is the next chapter of the story?
Yeah, Jared, that's a very good question. I think, look, I would like to get us to over 100 practices. When you get to that sort of size, you get the economies of scale and many different things. To get there is hard. You remember at the moment we're doing about 1.5 acquisitions a month, let's say. But for us to get there, we're going to have to really ramp up and do a lot faster and better. And you're just doing 2. That means you've got 2 letters of intent, you've got 2 investment committees, you've got 2 closing, you've got 2 everything. So the M&A will, just with having 2 is huge, and you've got to be able to do that. But you've also, we're seeing a bit of a change at the moment in practices. So one of the great routes to getting practices to us is through the brokers, and brokers have been phenomenal. We work with most of the brokers. In fact, most of the brokers have sold us practices. But we're starting to see now dentists coming direct to us, which is great, which we never expected. And it's over 50% now of our inquiries are direct to us. And so we need to keep that going and keep expanding it, etc.
I imagine that the network effect of dentists joining, having a wonderful experience, is the best distribution for you into wider market than, I know brokers do a wonderful job, but ultimately a WhatsApp message from me to my dental colleague who I went to dental school with, who set up his or her practice 20 miles away from me, when they hear of the wonderful experience that I've had, the relationships that I'm now building, the second life reinvigoration of working with a new management team, I imagine that amplifies and compounds. So probably getting to 16 was a lot of uphill battling, and I imagine getting to 32 will be a lot of uphill battling. But at some point, perhaps there's a little bit of a tipping effect where at least pipeline and deal origination starts to stabilize, I would imagine. But I'm also not in the consultant.
I think what we've seen is with interest rates coming down, and then I think banks being sort of interested in loaning to companies that are not going to perhaps be as affected by AI as other companies are. So what we're starting to see is independent dentists getting loan to value of 95% and 100% loan on the property. We're starting to see more independent dentists competing for the practices we're looking at, which we didn't see a year ago.
Interesting. If I think about I have two dental practices that we work with, and I'm thinking of when is big enough to have a conversation with DeNovo? What is my revenue and or EBITDA position? When should I start thinking about a conversation with yourselves?
Okay. So we do have acquisition criteria. We look for around 200,000 in EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
That's on an associate-led basis. So assuming the principal charges himself back at a certain level. We like to have a minimum of 3 chairs, and the opportunity, is not completely maxed out, if this see what I mean. We don't like to have more than 30% NHS at the moment. Private equity has been burnt over the years by the NHS, and that's fine, and we live with that. But we think there's also an opportunity with the NHS and also converting some of the NHS as well as we go forward. And, someone who's entrepreneurial, and, could really soak up the values of being a partner going forward. That's all we're looking for. And, we're really good. We try and initially have a Teams call. I do the first bit, then Brian comes on and does a much more tailored, this is what it would mean for you. And then we go and visit it straight away. We're also very lucky because everything is the same. So our offer is the same, our share purchase agreement is the same. We can, from LOI to completion, the fastest we've done is in 3 months, and we normally do about 4 months, which is half the time of our competitors. We're really quick. We're really focused.
That first conversation I'm imagining is, we recently held an event, and there was a speaker on the panel who spoke about they're acquiring in medical aesthetics right now, and he said the criteria almost above EBITDA and revenue, which are of course very important, is chemistry. And chemistry is the thing that they will start the deal focused on and they will end the deal focused on. Your first conversation with the practice leader, I'm assuming, is about the chemistry, but please let me know if that's not the case.
Yeah, I think it is. Look, I like to feel I can get on with most people, and my colleagues say the trouble with Mark is he likes everyone. I think that there is an element of truth in that. I try to see the best in people and try to work with them. However, I also very much believe that the people that ask the toughest questions and maybe a bit niggly with it, they're showing they're engaged and they're thinking about it. And actually some of the people who've asked the toughest questions have been some of my most successful partners. Naturally, we all want to be liked and we like to like each other and all the rest of it. So it's a combination of everything, but I'm not put off by having, and it's amazing how much people, say not just now and then something happens in their life and they say, we spoke last year, I'd be really interested to talk to you again.
I'm conscious of time and you've been very generous with yours.
Much time in you.
If we, we're in 2026 now, if we imagine in 2036 or as far out as the timeline and lifespan of DeNovo is, what is the one thing that you think will not change? And I guess similarly, what is the one thing that you think will change the fastest in terms of how the clinics operate, how the partnership develops? Your choice, but where do you feel this sense of gravity in the business that you're building? This is our true rooted foundation. We will not move from this position, and maybe it is shared ownership, I don't know, but this sort of forcing function down into the earth. And then similarly, what parts of the business are sort of the wind blows and maybe there's an opportunity here, there's an opportunity there. How do you think about that over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years?
Look, I think I'm not arrogant. 10-year plan you can really get God to laugh at you when you tell them that you're taking a plan. But look, I'd love to think that we could still maintain the shared ownership aspect and the collegiate style that we have and that works with us. I would like to see that we have, I'd like to see more and more the dentists are making more decisions, or everyone actually is making more of the decisions that affect the company going forwards and really engaged, and that they become much more current in business and the operating of a dental business. I would love to see that in the next 10 years. I think things will change dramatically. I think the digitization of healthcare, we recently hired Eddie Coyle, who's our medical director. He's right at the forefront of AI in digital imaging within healthcare. And he was also medical director of one of our bigger competitors. And we are just scraping the surface of what's going on and what's capable, and creating this, end-to-end service is very, very exciting. And, I think we'll see a big change within dentistry. Everyone gets a lot hung up in many ways on some of the cosmetic aspects of dentistry, but that is dentistry too. The way technology is going to be going, we won't be drilling fillings much longer. And, with the remineralization coatings such as Movardis, Securident, etc., you're going to see a big change. And interestingly, though, you look at some of the cosmetic people, someone comes in and says, look, I'm not happy with my smile or my length of my teeth or whatever it is. It's very interesting now how dentists are looking at that and saying, well, look, actually, we need to sort out your perio, your gums. We also need to sort out some of your occlusion, and we can do that. So I think we're going to see this sea change. And we mustn't forget, the mouth is the gateway to the body. If you get your teeth right, everything else is right. And it's very important.
I suddenly find myself very excited about dentistry, given the description you just gave of where things are going. The fact that there's a path to non-invasive or less invasive, the fact that the mouth, and actually I've seen more and more of this recently, the connection to oral health and sleeping and breathing and, to your point, the rest of the body. I know that there is a massive sea change in longevity and wellness and better looking after yourself, full stop. And I think, not being from dental, it sounds as though one of the things you're describing is dental will have its world and its role inside of the changing expectation of people pursuing, in this case, private, partially NHS, but largely private healthcare.
I think, the changing expectation is phenomenal. Like, one of my favorite products, Warder Emanuel founded it, and she was at MIT, and this product is phenomenal. It's called Overjet. It basically goes into your picture archive system for your imaging, and it finds all the stuff the dentist might have missed. And in the States, as I understand it, then books that patient in for that to be removed, and it already goes to the insurance companies and gets pre-authorization for that work to be done. That's phenomenal. And that was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Interesting to think imagine where we'll be in 5 years. Mark, thank you so much for sharing a bit of the story. I think that there's a lot to take for those who are building in dentistry, and similarly people building outside of dentistry, operating outside of dentistry, who I imagine will connect with a lot of the things that you've said. So thank you very much for joining. We really appreciate your time.
Jared, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Pleasure. That's it. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Mark with DeNovo Dental Partners. If you are building in dental, if you are operating in dental, if you are bringing interesting products into dental, Mark is probably a great person to reach out to. I'm sure that he is very findable on LinkedIn and or by email. And if you're thinking about shared ownership as the future of your dental practice, then this seems to be the only show in town, not only the best show in town, but also the only show in town, which is very exciting. So thanks very much, everyone.